Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. As you may notice, I'm out of uniform, so I'm still a little bit under the weather, so this will be a little bit muted. But I am on the mend, so I should be back to normal next week, like Sunday. So, anyway, we got to feed the algorithm, so here we go. More advisory note: human attachment by PerilousPlatypus. I've spent the better part of these past few years studying humanity. The research was fruitful. The conclusions, on the other hand, are quite concerning. Still, even concerning conclusions should be exposed to the scrutiny of others, particularly when they do much to explain our current predicament. I think I make no bold assumptions when I say that the war against humanity has gone poorly. For all of our manifest advantages at the outset, humanity has somehow managed to consistently defy the odds and survive. No, that's not correct. They have not just survived, they have thrived in this conflict. They have gained strength throughout. Why? Many hypotheses have been produced to explain this irksome reality. Some have suggested that humanity had merely hidden its true strength, effectively luring us into a conflict by presenting an appealing target. I, as well as others, have found little to support this conjecture. Humanity's industrial and technological position was quite well assessed before the commencement of the eradication effort. Their weapons? Inferior. Their manufacturing capacity? Vastly inferior. Their resource base? Laughably and totally inferior. Yet, here we are, besieged on all sides. Indeed, many of our vassal states and erstwhile allies have abandoned for the human cause, a frankly unimaginable outcome with not historic precedent. This has led my research down a somewhat unorthodox path, rather than assess humanity's position writ large, which has been well covered and yielded little by way of explanation. I have instead consulted the human individual. More particularly, I have been observing their relationship with their environment under a variety of circumstances. As mentioned before, the conclusions are alarming. I'll be blunt. Humans appear to be capable of attaching to anything. I don't mean this in the sense of physical adherence, though some of that does often accompany the phenomenon. I mean in a more intangible emotional sense. For lack of a better description, humans appear to be capable of humanizing anything. Allow me to elucidate. During my research, I was fortunate enough to obtain access to 37 humans, 28 biological males, 9 biological females. These 37 individuals were then placed in a variety of scenarios. A number of variables were introduced. Environment, peril, the degree to which the scenario was innately threatened. Participant mix, the number and mix of humans versus other species. Goals, the presence of clear outcome that might resolve the scenario. Other variables were, of course, present, but are unworthy of detailing in an abstract such as this. Regardless, approximately 780 scenarios were run over the past 2.5 years. Through the process, 16 of the human subjects were killed. The fact of their death is not particularly notable. Humans die all the time. The circumstances were. Of the 16 humans, 12 died in an effort to save the life of another being. Of these 12, 4 died for a being not of their species. In 2 cases of the 4, the humans had had no prior interaction with the non-humans prior to that scenario. Even more surprising, there was no shared spoke language. From our cultural perspective, we view this as nonsensical. More than one of my colleagues during the peer review process suggested that perhaps humans are particularly prone to suicidal behavior. This is wishful thinking, and it misses the point. The point is that humans build bridges in all directions, at all times. At one point, I began to place beings of lower order intelligence in with the humans, simply to see if there was a point where the humans would stop their curious habit of forming attachments. I can confidently say it seemed to only enhance the humans' willingness to build bonds. No other scenario stands out more than when we introduced a species native to the human homeworld into the scenario. This creature, commonly believed to be an enslaved vassal species known as a dog, began the scenario severely injured, and therefore of no immediate practical use to the human. And the environment was clearly threatening to both. We then tasked a series of aggressors with defeating the human and the native species. The human almost immediately took up a defensive position by the beast. It is hard to describe what follows. The human appeared to become feral itself, losing much of its higher-order executive function as it proceeded to rip apart its opposition in a profoundly disturbing way. The human fought even after its injuries had become fatal. It only collapsed once the final aggressor had been removed from the scenario. Before the human died, it crawled to the dog, gathered the beast in its arms, and patted it multiple times in assurance. I must remind you, prior to the scenario, the human had never seen the beast before, yet, within seconds, it had formed an attachment suitably strong to fight to the death in the defense of the beast. For all the strengths of our culture, we do not share this capacity for connection. Our relationships are transactional and driven by the logic of the circumstance they are formed in. We seek mutually beneficial entanglements and avoid interactions without these entanglements. Humanity's willingness to give without taking would, on the surface, seem to be a significant disadvantage. But, across these scenarios, humanity's willingness to take danger onto themselves, to place themselves in harm's way in favor of those around them, had a profound impact on those who were beneficiaries of this unusual benevolence. Time and time again, those protected by humanity drew closer to humanity. There were those who share our own cultural bias. 2 humans were killed attempting to defend a non-human species that in turn used the situation to their advantage. But in all other cases, the attachment became shared. Across 780 scenarios, humans formed an attachment with another participant 93% of the time. I use attachment rather than alliance because, as discussed before, the entanglement was not merely transactional. Within 723 attachment scenarios, participants scored an average of 164 points against the control score of 100. This 64-point differential amounts to the almost 300% increase in participant battle effectiveness. Now, consider it in the context of billions of scenarios playing out in millions of battlefields. Consider it in the context of every interaction humanity has with another species it can form an attachment with, which is effectively every species that's willing to admire them for being suicidal by my colleague's assessment. This is the human advantage. We do not have a solution for this. Our initial attack sparked a chain reaction, an immediate explosion in attachment, first within humanity, and now throughout our galaxy. Every day that passes is another day where our friends are converted into theirs. Whatever mutually beneficial arrangements we have offered our allies cannot be outweighed by the human willingness to fight and die on their behalf. I understand the treason of my writing, but I write it nonetheless. If we are to survive this war, we should do so by ending it immediately. We will lose much, but we cannot help but prevail against a species that is willing to sacrifice everything for a dog. End of story. Story number 2. Not the Hero We Need, written by EchoingCascade. Rokus was waiting in the bedroom of his fortified mansion, a pincer holding an ornate plasma pistol. The stranger is on its way. It had hit every single one of his establishments in the past month, burning everything to the ground, taking nothing but small, easily resellable items and killing everyone that stood in its path. Little was known about it. It was bipedal, a little over 6 feet tall, wearing black armor, and stronger than should be possible given its relative size. Something else was clear. It was angry. It didn't just kill these men. It took its time making sure they felt every blow, every cut, every burn to their last breath. Rokus had no idea who might be doing this. He had ruled Rakris Prime's criminal underground for decades and had made many, many enemies along the way. To narrow down the list would take more time than he had left. Explosions could be heard from the front door of his mansion for the last half an hour. Here it comes. Voss said that he got his hands on an anti-aircraft plasma cannon. He was certain that nothing could survive getting hit by that. he wasn't so optimistic. He had reviewed the footage of the stranger's carnage: grenades, small arms, heavy rifles, knives, swords, fire, cold, poison. Nothing had worked or even slowed it down. An explosion rocked the entire mansion, and the next moment the door of his chambers exploded in shrapnel. Several shards pierced his chitin, pinning him to the wall. He saw the creature walk in. It had lost its left arm in the previous fight, seared clean off at the shoulder. If he had thought for a second that Vorse was still alive, he would have prepared a hefty bonus for this accomplishment. Then again, I'm fairly sure I'm dead too. He was heavily injured, but yet to know, he refused to die ignorant. Who are you? Why? The stranger removed its helmet, let down its hair, and sat next to him and spoke in a single name, never opening its eyes. Srin Trass. Rokus recognized the name. A kid who had been caught in the middle of a gang war a couple months ago and died of his wounds. But more importantly, he recognized the species. A human. Female for what he could see. Makes some sort of sense. They're famous for their pack bonding, and it's a female too. An angry Deathworlder is a fighting thing to behold. And if it thought of the kid as it's young, he could understand why she did all this. What was he to you? Talking was getting difficult. He had lost too much blood and was fading fast. The woman picked a nail-like apparatus from one of her pouches and stabbed it into a stump. A pink gelatin began to form, which quickly reformed her lost arm. Then she opened her eyes, looked at him, and grinned. Her smile was one of genuine happiness, bordering on glee, but it was eyes that froze Rokus's blood in his veins. They were blue, with tiny pinpricks for pupils, and they darted left and right, as if unable to focus. He didn't know much about the human, but he knew madness when he saw it. You see, 2 months ago, I was sitting in my cubicle. Susan was talking to me about her cat or her baby. Can't remember. And I was thinking how great it would be to kill it in front of her. She hugged him with a newly regrown arm. She then stopped talking and looked at her datapad. It was about the death of Srin Trass. She got real quiet, and then she cried. She started to laugh. Rokus tried to grab his nearby pistol, but once she noticed, she hugged him tighter, painfully so. I was thinking where I should bury her body. When she said something that changed my life, she said, someone ought to do something. And I was just on the edge of snapping, just throwing the facade I had built all my life, but instead, something clicked. She let go of Rokus, stomped on his arms until they were no longer kept their shape. Rokus was in too much pain to pass out. And I realized that I could do whatever I wanted to you and yours, and no one would stop me. I would be celebrated as a hero, and I went into debt for everything I was worth, and got every military augment I could afford, and set forth to have some fun. Monst! The stranger put a boot to his face before he could finish, and bent with impressive flexibility until her mouth was next to his ear. You wanted to know who the brat was to me? As she crushed his head underfoot like a ripe tomato, she whispered in his ear, a great excuse. She picked up valuable items to resell. She had to finance her heroics, after all, and a family of 4 had been killed in the bombing of Rakras 4. As she giggled her way around the bodies in the mansion, crushing underfoot anyone that so much as twitched, a single thought entered her mind. Someone ought to do something about that. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.